I woke up to silence. Not the soft, sleepy kind you expect after giving birth, but a thick, unnatural stillness that made my skin crawl. The kind of silence that told you something was terribly, fundamentally wrong. The lights above buzzed faintly, the sterile smell of antiseptic thick in the air. My arms instinctively reached out, but the space beside me was empty. No baby, no crib, no swaddled bundle of warmth, just a folded hospital blanket and a laminated "congratulations" card taped to the wall, as if that could make up for the gaping hole beside me. A nurse walked in with a too bright smile, the kind they teach in training, the kind that comes with rehearsed reassurances. "Good morning, Grace, you're awake. That's wonderful, we'll get you something to eat soon." I tried to speak, but my throat felt raw. I croaked out the only thing that mattered.
"Oh, where's my baby?"
Her smile didn't falter, but I saw the flicker in her eyes, the slight hesitation. "She's already been transferred. The adoption agency picked her up this morning." My heart stopped. What adoption agency? My voice cracked like dry glass. "I didn't sign anything." "You did," she said softly. "Last night. Everything was handled through your husband. You agreed. It's all in the paperwork." She moved to adjust my IV like nothing earth-shattering had just been said. "Don't worry, Grace. You made the best decision. It's perfectly normal to feel a little disoriented at first. I didn't remember signing anything. I didn't remember last night. I remembered the contractions coming too fast, the epidural that didn't kick in fast enough, the pain, and then darkness. I never held her. I never named her. I never got to see her face. And somehow, in that void, my daughter vanished." Josh walked in later, holding a coffee he didn't offer me. He didn't meet my eyes. "I know you're upset," he said, like he was talking to a child who dropped a toy. "But this was for the best. You've been struggling, Grace, ever since the second trimester. You weren't yourself." His voice was flat, unbothered. "You said you couldn't do this. You told me you were scared. You were in and out of consciousness. The doctors agreed you were in no state to decide. So I took over." "Took over?" My fists clenched the thin blanket on my lap. "You gave away our daughter," I whispered. "Without me." Josh sighed and rubbed his temples like I was giving him a headache. "You're not seeing this clearly. We talked about adoption before, remember? You said if things got worse, if your depression came back." He sat down in the chair across from me. "Grace, I did what I had to do. You'll understand eventually. The couple is wonderful, stable. They can give her a better life." My brain couldn't process the words. All I could hear was the scream building in my chest that never made it out. I looked down at the hospital band on my wrist. My name. My birth date. My daughter had just come into the world and I had been erased from the moment she opened her eyes. And Josh, he wasn't grieving, he wasn't shocked, he was calm. "What agency?" I asked through gritted teeth. He blinked, like he hadn't expected me to ask. "It doesn't matter now, they have her. It's final." "No," I said, my voice shaking. "It's not." Josh leaned forward, voice low. "I'm your husband. I made the decision because I love you, because you weren't capable." That word, capable, hit harder than any slap. That was the word men like him used to silence women like me. That was the word courts listened to when custody was on the line. That was the word that turned grief into diagnosis, rage into instability. He stood up and walked to the door. "Get some rest. We'll talk more when you're thinking straight." The door clicked shut behind him. I sat alone in that whitewashed room, heart pounding, body aching, and soul cracked open. I didn't know where my daughter was. I didn't know her name. But I knew one thing with more certainty than I'd ever known anything in my life. Josh Holloway would never know peace again. The days after I was discharged from the hospital blurred together in a haze of silent suspicion and cold, suffocating rage. The house that once felt like mine now felt like a carefully curated prison, sterilized of all traces of a child. No crib, no blankets, no baby clothes. It was as if she had never existed. I searched every room, every drawer, every closet, but there was nothing. Even the pregnancy journals I had filled out obsessively for months, the sonogram pictures I had pinned on the fridge, gone, erased. like I was supposed to believe it had all been a dream. Josh insisted it was for my own mental health. You were struggling, he said more than once, as if that was a justification for stealing my daughter. You were losing sleep. You barely ate. You said you didn't feel connected to the baby. He parroted those lines like he was reading them from a script. But I remembered that conversation differently. I had shared my fears, yes, but every first-time mother does. I had said I was scared, not incapable, not unfit, but in his version, my vulnerability had become permission. He wouldn't tell me which agency he worked with. Every time I asked, he deflected. It's handled, he'd say. You don't need to reopen that wound. When I called hospitals, they claimed confidentiality. When I reached out to adoption centers, they all told me the same thing. Unless I had specific identifying information, they couldn't confirm anything. And of course, I didn't, because Josh had kept it all from me. One woman on the phone even said, according to the file, the birth mother consented. I hung up before I screamed. It was like running into a wall over and over again, each time with less breath, less strength, and more fury. I started going through Josh's office when he was out. He worked from home twice a week, but on the other days he left early and came home late. I told him I was resting, healing, grieving, whatever would keep him from suspecting. But in reality, I was digging. The man kept everything locked up. His filing cabinets had combination codes, his laptop was password protected, and I didn't know it. I tried every birthday I could think of, ours, his, even our wedding anniversary. Nothing worked. But one day, buried in the back of his sock drawer, I found an envelope. Inside were torn scraps of paper, receipts, email printouts, and a post-it note that simply read, Bethany plus Thomas, March 8th, $45.00 K donation. The handwriting was unmistakably his. Bethany and Thomas, were they the ones who had my daughter? I stared at that name until it blurred. Then I Googled every combination I could think of. Bethany adoption, Bethany and Thomas, infant adoption, March 8th, Ohio. Nothing. I tried public records, donation trackers, even obscure forums, still nothing. But the amount, $45,000.00, kept looping through my mind like a cursed melody. That wasn't a donation, that was a transaction. The worst part was that I started doubting my own memories. That's what abuse does. It doesn't just break you, it makes you question the pieces. I remembered being tired. I remembered crying for no reason. I remembered feeling disconnected at times, and Josh latched onto those moments like anchors, tying them to every justification he had. You had postpartum depression, he said once. It started before the birth. It's textbook, you just don't see it. He even arranged a therapy session for me. The woman sat in our living room with a soft voice and warm eyes, but I could tell she had been briefed. Josh introduced us, then left us alone. When I told her what happened, her face didn't change. She asked about my mood, my sleep, my eating habits. Have you been hallucinating? She asked gently. Have you had trouble distinguishing between dreams and reality? I stared at her, realizing what Josh was doing. He wasn't just trying to rewrite the past. He was trying to institutionalize the present. After that, I started recording things, quietly, secretly. I installed an app on my phone that captured background audio whenever voices were detected. I planted an old phone under the couch cushions in his office. I began logging his schedule, tracking his words. I wasn't sure what I was looking for yet, but I knew I needed evidence. Not for the police, not for some theoretical court, but for myself, so I wouldn't be gaslit out of my own grief. One night, I confronted him. It wasn't planned, I just snapped. He made an offhand comment about how we could finally travel again now that things were simpler, as if our daughter had been clutter. What did you do, Josh? I asked. What did you sign? Who are Bethany and Thomas? He narrowed his eyes. You've been going through my things, he said. That's a serious breach of trust, Grace. My laugh was hollow. A breach of trust? You took my child. He stepped toward me, and for a second I thought he was going to hit me. Instead, he just smiled. No judge would give you custody, Grace, not after what you said during pregnancy. I documented everything. You were unstable. You begged me to help you. I stared at him, stunned. You documented it? Of course, he said. Smug. I had to protect her. And myself. You think you're the only one who can build a case? That's when it all clicked. He had planned this. Months in advance. He kept notes, manipulated doctors, isolated me from friends and family. I hadn't seen my sister in over 6 months. Not since Josh said she was a bad influence. He controlled our finances. I hadn't had access to our joint account in weeks. He controlled the narrative, the optics, the story. But he made one mistake. He underestimated me. I waited until he was asleep to check his phone. He always kept it face down on the nightstand, but he never changed his passcode. I knew it from the way his thumb moved. Inside, I found email drafts, unsent, but saved. One was to a lawyer, discussing finalizing the private arrangement. Another to someone named T. Wexler, thanking them for their discretion and assuring them that Grace has been successfully stabilized. I forwarded them to myself. Then, I deleted the sent emails, wiped the history, and put the phone back. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't cry. I made a plan. It wouldn't be quick. It wouldn't be loud, but it would be precise. Because I may have lost my child, but I hadn't lost my mind. And Josh, he had no idea what I was becoming. I didn't have money, not the kind of money that makes things move fast, or quietly. Josh had locked down our joint accounts months ago for budgeting purposes, and since I hadn't been working since the 3rd trimester, I didn't have personal savings to draw from. But what I did have was time and rage. And if I had to trade hours for information, then I'd give every sleepless night I had left. I started small. I went back through our old tax returns, hunting for anything that seemed off. It was tedious, frustrating work, especially since Josh had always handled the financial side of our marriage. But somewhere between line items and deduction codes, I found a strange entry, a donation made earlier that year to a nonprofit I'd never heard of. Lighthouse Family Advocates. It sounded innocent enough, maybe even noble, but when I searched for it online, the website was bare bones. No staff page, no location, just a contact form and a quote about helping families complete their journey. I filled out the form using a fake name and a burner email. I said I was looking to build a private adoption plan discreetly. Within 2 hours, someone responded. The email was short and polite, thanking me for my interest and asking when I'd like to set up a call. There was a phone number at the bottom, no area code, just digits. I didn't call. Instead, I passed it to a private investigator whose number I'd been sitting on for weeks. Her name was Marlene Ellis. She wasn't cheap and she didn't sugarcoat. I specialize in messy, she said on the phone. You sure you're ready to dig up things you can't bury again? I told her everything. The hospital, the forged papers, the missing agency name, the emails, the name Bethany and Thomas, the $45,000, 0 cents. When I finished, there was a pause. That's not an adoption, she said. That's a transaction wrapped in paperwork. Give me a few days. 3 days later, she called me back with a voice that was tighter than before. You were right. Lighthouse Family Advocates is a shell. It's registered out of a UPS store box in Delaware. It's not an agency. It's a broker. Technically legal but highly predatory. No oversight, no accountability. They match birth parents and prospective adopters privately to avoid scrutiny. I felt my stomach twist. And the couple? I asked. Bethany and Thomas Carlisle, married, mid-30s, no kids, live in upstate New York. They've worked with this group before, lost a previous match due to the birth mother changing her mind. This time, they were told the mother was unstable and unfit, that the father was acting in the best interest of the child. They paid the donation in full. Your husband signed on your behalf. And yes, he forged it. My knees buckled. I had known. But hearing it spoken aloud made it feel real in a new, brutal way. Can I get her back? I whispered. Marlene sighed. It's complicated. They think the adoption was legitimate. They've bonded. They're not the enemy here, Grace. But your rights may not be fully extinguished if fraud is proven. That'll take time. And teeth. The next step wasn't legal. It was personal. I needed to see them. To see her. Marlene warned me against it, said it could compromise everything, but I couldn't help it. I needed to know my daughter was safe. I booked a one-night flight to Albany and rented a car. Marlene had given me the address under the table. Their house was beautiful, suburban, wrapped in clean fences and flower beds. It looked like a magazine spread, like the life I was told I couldn't give her. I didn't go to the door. I sat in the car across the street and watched. I told myself I'd leave after 10 minutes. But then she came out, a woman in jeans and a ponytail, holding a tiny baby wrapped in a pale yellow blanket. My daughter. Even from the distance I knew. My breath hitched in my throat as I watched the woman rock her gently, humming something under her breath. She wasn't careless. She wasn't cruel. She was just a mother. I cried the entire drive back to the airport. Not because I hated her, but because I didn't. And that made it harder. When I got home, Josh was watching TV like the world hadn't changed. He asked if I had gone out to clear my head. I smiled. I was done screaming at him. Screaming was a waste of power. I needed to be strategic. Over the next week, I worked with Marlene to gather more evidence. Bank statements, digital signatures, records of therapy sessions he had scheduled for me without my knowledge, and the emails I had forwarded from his phone. Every piece was a nail in the coffin. The final one came from a voicemail, one I didn't expect. Josh had called Lighthouse to confirm the transfer had gone through. She still thinks she has rights, he said, laughing, but she'll move on eventually. She's good at lying to herself. I saved it, labeled it proof_1, and emailed it to myself and to Marlene. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I imagined the courtroom. I imagined the moment his mask would fall. I imagined a judge looking over the forged documents, hearing his voice on tape, seeing the donation trail. And I imagined my daughter, someday, learning the truth. That I didn't give her up, that I fought, that I refused to disappear. Josh had stolen a piece of me, but I was done being afraid of him. He built a fortress of lies, thinking I wouldn't find the door, but now I had the key, and I was going to knock that door off its hinges, not with vengeance, not with fire, but with truth sharp enough to cut through everything he ever said about me, because I may have been broken, but I was still her mother, and I was done waiting for permission to act like it. The email I sent to Bethany Carlisle was simple, restrained, and agonizing to write. I didn't accuse her. I didn't beg. I didn't threaten. I told her who I was, Grace Holloway, biological mother of the infant she was raising, and I told her I had reason to believe she hadn't been given the full truth about the adoption. I said I wasn't here to destroy her family, but I couldn't keep living in silence while my child's life unfolded without me. I hit send and waited with a sick knot in my stomach, fully prepared for the possibility that she would never respond, or worse, that she'd respond with legal threats. But 2 days later at 6:17 p.m., her reply came. It was only one line. "Can we talk?" She included her number, and I stared at it for a long time, my hands shaking, my breath short and uneven. The voice on the other end of the phone wasn't what I expected. It wasn't guarded or accusatory. It was soft, hesitant, human. "Grace," she said, "I've had the feeling for weeks now that something wasn't right. We talked for over an hour. She told me how they had been introduced to Josh through the agency and how quickly everything had moved after that. She said she'd asked if the mother wanted to meet, but the agency said it wasn't safe and wouldn't be emotionally healthy for either side. She had believed them. She said she and her husband had struggled with infertility for years, had had 2 matches fall through, and that this, my daughter, had felt like a miracle. But now I feel like I stole her," she said through tears. "I didn't know. I swear I believed her. I didn't want to, but I did. And that made it worse somehow, because now the enemy wasn't Bethany. It was Josh. It had always been Josh. He was the puppeteer who manipulated everyone. Me, her, the system. Bethany asked if we could meet. I flew out 2 days later. I didn't tell Marlene. I didn't tell anyone. I just packed a small bag, printed out the evidence I had so far, and boarded the flight with a sense of dread and something that almost felt like hope. Their home was exactly as I remembered it, picturesque, peaceful. When Bethany opened the door, she looked like she hadn't slept in days. We sat in her kitchen. Her husband, Thomas, was at work. The baby, my baby, was napping upstairs. I showed her everything: the forged signature, the therapy documents, the email Josh wrote to the broker, the voicemail. She read through it all in silence, her hand trembling slightly as she turned each page. When she looked up, her face was pale. "I want to believe this is all a mistake," she said, "but I can't. Not after seeing this. He lied to all of us." I didn't expect what she said next. "Do you want to see her?" I froze. My mouth opened, but no words came out. Then I nodded. She led me upstairs into a softly lit nursery with a mobile turning slowly above the crib. And there she was. Tiny. Sleeping. Perfect. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but I didn't. I just stood there, gripping the side of the crib, drinking her in with my eyes, memorizing every detail of her face. Bethany stood beside me, not saying anything, just letting the moment be. Over the next few hours, we talked about everything: about the lawsuit I was preparing, about what would happen if the adoption was ruled invalid, about custody and visitation and trauma. "She knows me as her mother," Bethany said quietly, "but I'm not asking you to disappear." I looked at her and saw not a thief, but another woman in an impossible situation. She didn't try to push me away. In fact, she did the opposite. She offered to help, to testify if needed, to tell the court that she was misled, that I had been silenced, that my rights had been violated. It wasn't the reaction I expected. It wasn't a fairy tale ending either. It was complicated, messy, but it was real. We agreed to stay in contact, at least until the court process began. I returned home with a strange mixture of grief and clarity. The pain hadn't gone away, but it had become something I could carry without collapsing. When I walked back into the house, Josh was in the kitchen making dinner, pretending like we were a normal couple. He asked if I'd enjoyed my little getaway. Didn't follow me. That night, I slept in the guest room, with the door locked. The next morning, Marlene and I met with the attorney she'd been vetting. His name was Richard Kavanaugh. Gruff, sharp, and utterly uninterested in anything that wasn't hard evidence. When I handed him the folder of proof, he flipped through it methodically, making small noises under his breath. "You have a case," he said finally. "A good one. Fraudulent adoption, forged consent, financial transactions disguised as donations. This isn't just unethical, it's criminal." We began drafting the lawsuit that same day. Simultaneously, Richard filed a motion to petition the court for a stay on the adoption, arguing that it was obtained under fraudulent circumstances. It would be a hard fight, and nothing was guaranteed, but the moment that paperwork was submitted, something inside me shifted. I wasn't surviving anymore, I was fighting. And this time, I had allies. Bethany kept her word. She wrote a statement, detailed and emotional, confirming that she had been told I was unfit and unstable, that the agency warned her not to make contact, that Josh was the only person she communicated with throughout the process. She admitted to paying the $45,000, 0 cents, directly to the agency, but insisted she had no idea it was anything other than protocol. Her honesty lent weight to our case. So did the voicemail. So did the forged documents. Josh, of course, tried to control the narrative. He sent emails to friends, family, even my sister, claiming I was relapsing, that I had become obsessed with the baby, that I was dangerously unstable. But this time, nobody believed him. Or at least nobody said so out loud. The walls he had built around his version of the truth were starting to crack, and soon they'd collapse completely. I didn't know how it would end, whether I'd regain custody, whether a judge would rule in my favor, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. My daughter would grow up knowing that her mother didn't abandon her, that she wasn't unwanted, that someone fought through hell to make sure the truth came to light. And Josh? He would finally understand what it meant to face consequences, not from a courtroom alone, but from a world that had stopped believing his lies. I didn't announce anything publicly at first. Not the lawsuit, not the court motion, not even the fact that I had seen my daughter. I wanted control. Timing was everything now. Josh still believed I was operating out of emotion, that I'd spiral, burn out, or make some impulsive move he could weaponize in court. He still thought I was weak. That was his fatal mistake. I wasn't going to explode. I was going to erode him, slowly, relentlessly, until he had nothing left to stand on. The first fracture came when the lawsuit was officially filed and delivered to his email and office. I had copies sent to both his employer and the HR department, not out of spite, but because the company's name had appeared in one of his earlier donation receipts. I knew it would trigger an internal review. It did. 2 days later, I heard from Marlene that Josh had been put on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. He came home that night, livid, pacing around the house, yelling about how I was ruining his life. "You think you're the only one hurting?" he shouted, voice hoarse. "You have no idea what you're doing." I sat calmly on the couch, watching him unravel, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel fear. I didn't flinch. I let him scream because the louder he got, the more he proved my point. He was losing control. By the end of that week, the story went public. Richard had been working with a local journalist, someone who specialized in family law and women's rights cases. Her name was Elise, and she didn't just report stories, she exposed them. The article dropped on a Friday morning titled, "Mother Says Daughter Was Given Up Without Her Consent, Files Suit Against Husband and Private Adoption Broker." Within hours, it went viral. The journalist had done her homework, including court documents, quotes from the motion, and, most damningly, snippets from the recorded voicemail where Josh laughed about me, still thinking she had rights. Social media exploded. Hashtags circulated, comments poured in, most of them furious. "This isn't adoption, it's trafficking. How is this legal? She deserves her daughter and her justice." Josh called me in a panic. I didn't answer. He texted me, begged me to reconsider, to settle privately, to think about our reputations. Then he tried guilt. "What if she grows up seeing all this? You want her first memories of her mom to be a scandal?" That one stung, but not for the reason he thought. I wasn't ashamed. I was protecting her from the real scandal, the one he built in secret. Then the media requests started coming. Elise's article had drawn national attention. Talk shows, podcasts, even morning news anchors wanted interviews. I declined most of them. This wasn't about attention. But one outlet, a well-respected national magazine, offered to publish a first-person essay from me under a pseudonym. That I agreed to. I wrote the story carefully, my story, highlighting what it means to be silenced, to be gaslit, to lose a child not to death or illness, but to betrayal. I didn't name Josh. I didn't need to. The people who knew, knew, and the people who didn't still felt the fire behind every word. The fallout hit fast. His job officially terminated him after their internal review cited ethical misconduct and reputational risk. His LinkedIn profile disappeared overnight. Friends who used to invite us to barbecues now ignored his calls. His own parents, conservative, image-obsessed churchgoers, released a statement through their church distancing themselves from recent legal allegations and expressed support for the well-being of the child and her biological mother. The translation, even they had turned on him. And yet, through all this, Josh still tried to act like he had some moral high ground. He filed a counterclaim, accusing me of defamation, mental instability, and harassment. Richard tore it apart in court within 20 minutes. The judge barely looked at it. We had more than enough documentation to prove malicious intent on Josh's part. Emails, forged signatures, transaction records, therapy manipulation. Every counterattack he launched only made our case stronger. Bethany continued to stand by me, even when things got messy. The press eventually discovered her name, and though we'd tried to keep her out of it, they linked her to the adoption. She called me in tears after reporters showed up at her house. I apologized, offered to pay for security if needed, but she refused. "I'm with you, Grace. I'm not backing out now." Her strength floored me. She and Thomas began working with their own attorney to figure out how to restructure the adoption, if it would even remain valid. We started planning for every possible outcome, including joint custody, visitation schedules, and transitional therapy for the baby. We both knew nothing about this situation was ideal, but at least now it was honest, real, redeemable. Josh, meanwhile, became a ghost of himself. He stopped showing up to court. His attorney withdrew from the case, citing irreconcilable conflict. He tried moving out of state, but Richard froze his assets and flagged his travel. He was cornered. The man who once controlled every variable in my life couldn't even get a hotel room without checking in under an alias. I heard he moved into a dingy sublet across town, alone, unemployed, and toxic to everyone who once admired him. I never wanted revenge, not the cartoon kind. Not the angry, fire and brimstone fantasy where the villain is humiliated in front of a crowd. I wanted justice. I wanted clarity. I wanted the truth to be louder than his lies. And now it was. People believed me. The system, flawed as it was, had finally turned its eye toward him instead of me. And for once, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel broken. One night, weeks after the media storm had calmed, I got a message from a woman I didn't know. She said she had once worked at the same brokerage that handled my daughter's adoption. She had left years ago, but she'd read my article and wanted to talk. What she told me next chilled me. My story wasn't unique. He's done this before, she said. Different families, different women, always under the radar, always manipulating the system just enough to keep it legal. He promised to testify if needed. Richard and I added her to the witness list. The court date for the final hearing was set for late spring. It would determine the validity of the adoption, my parental rights, and the fate of the man who thought he could play God. I wasn't walking into that courtroom alone. I had my daughter's photo in my bag, I had Bethany beside me, I had truth on paper, and I had a voice no longer shaking. Josh thought I'd move on, that I'd collapse under the weight of grief and confusion and let him narrate the rest of my story. But I didn't. I sharpened that grief until it cut through everything he built on silence. And the best part? I never had to scream. I just spoke the truth and let it burn. The courthouse was colder than I expected, not in temperature, but in feeling. An austere, sterile place where families unraveled in front of strangers in suits. I sat at the long oak table, my fingers tracing the grooves in the wood, trying to steady my breath. On my left was Richard, calm and composed, his briefcase already opened and filled with meticulously organized documents, emails, voice recordings, and printed evidence. On my right sat Bethany, her hands folded tightly in her lap, a woman caught between two identities, mother by circumstance and mother by nurture. She had every right to be angry with me, to fear me, to hate me for the chaos I had brought into her life, but she never wavered. She stood beside me, even knowing that this hearing might end with the court undoing her motherhood. That kind of courage didn't come from guilt. It came from conviction, from truth. Josh entered the room flanked by a new attorney, his third. He looked thinner, grayer, his usual smug expression replaced by something that almost resembled exhaustion. He avoided my eyes, which was fine. I didn't need him to see me. I needed the judge to see what he had done. The courtroom filled slowly. No jury, just a single judge assigned to family court matters. A few journalists sat near the back, notebooks ready, though they'd been warned not to photograph anything. This wasn't a criminal trial, but it might as well have been. The stakes were higher than prison time. This was about a child's identity, a mother's right, a woman's voice that had been systematically erased. Richard opened the arguments with his usual precision. He presented the documentation of forged consent, the financial donation, the correspondence between Josh and the broker, the testimony from the woman who had worked at the agency. He played the voicemail. Josh's laugh echoed through the room like a ghost that wouldn't die. She still thinks she has rights, the recording said. The judge's expression didn't change, but her pen stopped moving for a moment. And that was enough. We submitted therapy notes showing that Josh had weaponized my vulnerability. We showed the proof of isolation, financial control, and digital surveillance. Bethany's affidavit confirmed that she had been misled and manipulated, that she had believed I was unfit and had never been told I wanted to parent my child. Every word she spoke cracked the foundation of the adoption deeper. When Josh's attorney stood to respond, his voice was dry and defensive. He tried to argue that Josh had acted out of concern for my mental health, that the adoption had been in the child's best interest, that any miscommunications were clerical. But when the judge asked him directly if he could explain the forged signature or the unlicensed intermediary, he faltered. Josh shifted uncomfortably in his chair, lips pressed so tightly they turned white. There was no defense strong enough to disguise what this really was. Theft, dressed in legalese. After hours of testimony and document review, the judge called for a recess. We stepped outside into the hallway, the air thick with anticipation and nerves. Bethany sat on a bench, eyes red but dry. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "she deserves the truth." I nodded, too tired to say anything else. I didn't know what I wanted the judge to do. Part of me ached to hear the words that my rights had been restored. Another part feared what that would do to Bethany, to the child who knew her voice, her scent, her warmth. I didn't want to take my daughter from the only family she'd known. I just didn't want to be erased from the picture. When we returned to the courtroom, the judge didn't waste time. Her ruling came in a calm, deliberate voice, each word weighted with legal gravity and human consequence. She declared the adoption invalid on the grounds of fraud. My consent, she said, had not been freely or knowingly given. The broker had operated outside the bounds of legal procedure. Josh's actions, including the forged documents and obstruction of contact, had irreparably undermined the integrity of the adoption process. My rights, she ruled, were to be reinstated immediately. There was silence in the room, heavy and electric. Josh sat frozen, blinking rapidly as if hoping this was some kind of mistake. It wasn't. The judge turned to me next, stating that while my rights had been restored, the court recognized the strong and loving bond between the child and her current caretakers. A transition plan would be arranged to ensure the child's emotional well-being with professional counseling and gradual integration. I would not rip her away. I would step into her life, not as a stranger, but as a presence she could grow to trust. It was more than I had hoped for. It was everything. Josh's consequences didn't end there. The judge referred his case for criminal investigation related to fraud and falsification of legal documents. He didn't speak. He just stood, slowly, as if gravity had doubled, and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. I didn't follow him. I never would again. After the ruling, Bethany and I hugged, not because we were friends or because we agreed on everything, but because we had survived the same storm and were walking out of it still holding something sacred, a child, a future, a second chance. In the following weeks, the logistics began. Counseling sessions, court-approved visitations, long conversations about boundaries and timelines. Bethany and I made a promise, to each other and to the little girl we both loved. No secrets, no poison, no fighting in front of her. She would grow up knowing she came from two women who refused to be enemies, who refused to lie, who chose truth no matter how hard it hurt. The world quieted around us. The media cycle faded. The hashtags disappeared. Josh's name stopped trending. But the most important thing didn't fade. My place in my daughter's life. It wasn't a victory parade. It was quieter, better. And for the first time since I opened my eyes in that hospital bed and reached for an empty crib, I no longer felt powerless. I felt whole. I never imagined that justice would look like compromise, that I'd have to share what had been stolen from me. But justice doesn't always come clean or complete. Sometimes it comes in pieces, in steps, in the steady reclaiming of what was taken. And when I held my daughter's hand for the first time during our court-approved visit, when she smiled at me, curious and unafraid, I knew this was the beginning of something not perfect, but real, something worth every sleepless night, every courtroom battle, every scar. Josh once told me I wasn't capable, that I couldn't do this, that I'd fall apart, but I didn't. I rose, I fought, and now, even with all the damage and loss behind me, I stood at the edge of something beautiful. Not revenge, not destruction, but restoration. And that was more powerful than any punishment I could have given him. Some mornings I still wake up expecting the silence, that same suffocating stillness from the hospital room all those months ago. But it doesn't come anymore, not like it used to. These days the air feels lighter, like something has shifted around me. The house is still quiet, but now it's the kind of quiet that holds peace instead of absence. I sip coffee at the kitchen table, watching the sun stretch across the floorboards, and I think about how far I've come from the woman who once sat in this same spot, shattered and searching for a name she couldn't even speak aloud. Everything has changed since the court ruling. Nothing feels rushed anymore. We're following a slow, careful plan laid out by counselors, social workers, and two women determined not to let ego ruin what love can mend. I see my daughter twice a week. At first, she was unsure of me, wide-eyed, watchful. But kids know things that adults forget. She didn't need long to sense that I wasn't a stranger. She started reaching for me, babbling in my arms, falling asleep on my shoulder. The first time she called me Gigi, Bethany looked up from across the room and smiled. She didn't correct her, neither did I. We've become something strange and beautiful, a team built out of wreckage. Bethany and I aren't friends in the traditional sense, but we're allies in the deepest way. We share stories about sleep schedules, food preferences, new words. We argue sometimes, of course, about boundaries, routines, decisions, but we do it with purpose, not malice. We never let the child become the battlefield. That's our silent agreement. That's what separates us from the man who tried to control the narrative. Josh has disappeared completely from our lives. After the criminal charges were filed, he entered a plea deal, probation, a fine, barred from any future legal involvement in adoption services. His name was removed from the child's birth certificate by court order. He tried to reach out once, through a lawyer, claiming he wanted visitation rights as a father. The request was denied. He hasn't tried again. I sometimes wonder where he is now, whether he regrets it, whether he still blames me for unraveling the life he built out of lies. But I don't dwell on him. He doesn't deserve the space anymore. Instead, I've focused on rebuilding myself. I started working again, freelance editing from home at first, then gradually returning to part-time work in a publishing house. It feels good to use my mind for something outside of pain. I joined a support group for women who experienced coerced adoptions or parental alienation. The first time I spoke, my hands trembled, but by the end, half the room was crying. There's a power in shared survival, in knowing you're not the only one who's been told you are too emotional to be trusted with your own child. I've made it my mission to speak up for women who still feel like they're drowning in silence, not because I think I'm some savior, but because I know what it's like to scream into a void and hear nothing back. My daughter is growing fast now. She toddles around with purpose, dragging toys behind her, pointing at everything, laughing with her whole body. She knows me. Maybe not in the way she knows Bethany, not yet, but in the way that counts. The way her arms reach up when she sees me, the way she falls asleep pressed against my chest, the way she babbles Gigi home when I'm not there. She doesn't understand courtrooms, signatures, or betrayal. She just knows that I'm someone safe, someone steady. And maybe that's the greatest justice of all. Not the ruling, or the punishment, or the media firestorm, but the quiet moment when a child looks at you and sees love. There are still hard days where the weight of what was stolen from me creeps back in, days when I feel anger burning beneath my skin, wanting to rise again. But then I remember that I didn't just survive him, I outgrew him. I outlasted the silence he tried to bury me in, and in the end, I didn't just take my life back, I made something better out of it. So no, this isn't a story about revenge. It's not about punishment. It's about reclamation. It's about truth. It's about standing in the ashes of what someone else tried to destroy and saying, you don't get the final word, because I do. And the word is enough. Enough silence, enough shame, enough pretending that what happened to me was acceptable. I'm not a victim. I'm not a survivor. I'm a mother, and I'm still here.